In Matthew chapter 28, verse 19, it's recorded that Jesus said to his disciples, "Go therefore and make disciples." But I think there is a problem when it comes to making disciples. Particularly when I say this, I'm referring to today, our modern era. And I think that that problem stems from the root issue that many of us that talk about this and that want to do this, we don't know what Jesus meant when he said, "Go and make disciples." You know, you'll hear it commonly said that the Bible was written for us, but it was not written to us. And one of the issues that we will run into as we read the text of Scripture is that we'll come across terms and concepts that are foreign to us. They're not familiar to us, language that we're not using, words that we don't say. And what will happen, especially if the concept or the term is repeated frequently in Christianity, we will naturally start to infuse our own ideas or our own meaning into the text. And we're not doing this out of any notion of trying to treat the text poorly or anything nefarious. It becomes a kind of automatic response that when we think we know what something is talking about or something's being referred to, we will then just start to subconsciously infuse that term with the meaning that we are bringing and carrying to the text. And I think this is happening greatly with this passage of making disciples. We hear this so much in church world and Christian circles that even though disciple is technically a generic term, it's a general term, it's not a Christian term, a theological term that you'd come across something like the Trinity, for example. But 9 times out of 10, if not like 9.9 times out of 10, if you hear someone use this term disciple, it's likely going to be a Christian, and it's likely going to be a Christian in reference to talking to other people about Jesus or, you know, what it looks like to live out the Christian life. And so it has greatly become today a Christian term. And that fundamentally is where I think the problem lies. It's because we believe the concept of being a disciple, making a disciple, we think this is largely a Christian construct, as if Jesus was instituting this new idea, this new way of living in this concept of disciple. Now, of course, I do think that Jesus was bringing about a new way of life and a new way of living. And I think that being a disciple of Jesus is the pathway that you share in that or engage with or learn about how to live out that new way of life. However, it would be a mistake to think that the term and the concept of disciple alone is a Christian construct that we can kind of infuse with our own meaning. So maybe we're aware of that, right? Like maybe you're reading the Bible, you come across this word disciple, and Jesus is telling his disciples to do this. And so we then, as followers of Jesus, we also want to live out this command. You know, we call it the Great Commission. And so maybe you're like, you know, I thought it looked like this or meant this, and you're bringing some assumptions to the table, but you know that those assumptions ultimately may not be correct. And so you want to challenge that thought a little bit. So maybe you take a step forward and you want to look at what is the Greek word that's under this term disciple, right? So you go to blueletterbible.org and you type in Matthew chapter 28, verse 19. And you see that under this word disciple is the Greek, or specifically in this passage, make a disciple. You see under that is the Greek term mathetuo. And so you look at that and you go, okay, well, what does that mean? So you look at some of the definitions and, you know, it's like one who follows, one who is a disciple, one who's learning from. And so you're like, okay, it's this verb. And you see that the root word for mathetuo is the noun mathetes. And so you go click on that and you're like, okay, well, what does that word mean, right? The root word. Okay, so I have the verb form. I want to look at the root of the word, which is a noun. And under that, you see that it means a pupil, a learner, or commonly one of the things that people will say is a student. So you've taken this step forward because you're not just simply working with the translation of the text, the New Testament from Greek to English. You're now wanting to get under this Greek term, the English term, and to see what the Greek says. But when you do that, you then get these other definitions like a pupil, a learner, a student. And so then the next mistake that we make is we then, again, we take our ideas of what a pupil, a follower, a learner is, and then again, we infuse that into the text. So, for example, what comes into your mind when you think about a student? How have you been formed through culture, through your everyday life? I don't know if you're out of college, in college, how much of high school did you complete? If you did any, maybe you're a dropout. I don't know where you are with watching this. But when I say that someone is a student, and I'm talking to another American in our modern culture, and I use that term, there are going to be ideas that come into your mind naturally, automatically when I say that, because we have been taught and conditioned, informed, and shaped by our culture with what a student is, how a student learns. So maybe in your mind, when you think of someone being a student, or you think of being a student, what comes to your mind is you think of rows of desks and chairs, you think of sitting in a classroom, and when you think of a teacher, you think of someone who stands in front of the class and who monologues and who tells you what you need to learn, and they show you and they teach you, and they're kind of the holder of knowledge, and your role is to just soak in that information. You take notes, you write down, and you're getting ready to take some tests. And so it's largely driven by knowledge transfer, right? You're sitting in rows in a class with people that are usually around your age and learning experience. And there's a teacher who stands in front of the class, and largely everyone's going to be quiet. You only talk if you raise your hand to ask a question. But other than that, you sit there silently. You have, your pen or, pencil, and you have your notebook in front of you, or, I don't know, maybe today everyone's using VR glasses in classrooms or something. You're taking notes on iPads. I don't know, voice memos and AI is doing for. But when I grew up, we're using number 2 pencils and stuff like that. But you get it. So anyway, but then there's again the teacher up front, and the goal is knowledge transfer. They know, you don't, you learn in that way. And so that's this idea. So what then happens when we talk about this concept of disciple, we can start to infuse it with those ideas and those pictures. And so you'll hear about churches and people having disciple pipelines and discipleship pathways, and go through this discipleship course. And listen, I do not think there's anything wrong with these things supplementing and being tools that we use in this journey of making disciples. However, I think the fundamental problem lies when we think that is the way, when we think that that's what it means to be the student and that's how someone learns. And so we treat that as the substance of what it means to make disciples. But all of this creates a problem. It creates a conflict, because when we think that disciple and making disciples, when we think this is a Christian construct, and when we treat it with infusing our own meanings and our own definitions, we can find ourselves drifting very far from what Jesus meant when he told his disciples to go and make disciples. Earlier, I mentioned that this is not a Christian construct. The idea of making disciples and the idea of being a disciple is actually a part of the Jewish education system. And so it was a part of the cultural milieu that these men lived in, that these disciples lived in, that these followers of Jesus, men and women included, that they lived in. It was a part of the cultural milieu. If you went up to any first century Jew and you used these terms, now, of course, they weren't speaking English, and they also weren't speaking Greek, though the New Testament was written in Greek. But, if you go to them and you are talking about the concept, or you're bringing up a disciple, or you say you are a disciple, or you tell someone to make a disciple, they know what that means. Like, there's information that floods their mind. There are images, there are pictures, there's things in the subconscious that's clicking on, because they're in a cultural moment. They're in a space where this is something that's happening. Like, disciples are being made. They know what that is. So what we need to ask ourselves when Jesus tells his disciples to make disciples, and this is kind of the ongoing pattern that, that Jesus started. Again, the concept of disciple and what that was, that's not new. But this pattern of you and I today being disciples of Jesus removed 2,000 years from that moment when Jesus told his disciples to go make disciples. I've said disciples, 1,000 times so far. I'm probably going to listen back to this and be like, Okay, we need to say that less. But anyway, the what we really want to do, if we want to faithfully understand as best as we can what Jesus meant, is to not, of course, assume what it means. It's to not just infuse it with our own kind of ideas, or well, this is what our church says, or this is our process, or this is what the handbook of whatever organization I'm a part of. And we don't even just simply want to go pull up a Blue Letter Bible or a lexicon or an interlinear Greek to English and just look at terms and words that are being used that we're translating from. What we want to do, if we want to understand what Jesus meant when he told his disciples to make disciples, we want to, as best we can, get under or ask the question, what was in Jesus's mind when he said, go and make disciples, and what were in the disciples' minds when they heard him say, go and make disciples? That's what is most important. That is what we need to get under. We have to get under when Jesus used this idea and he told this to his disciples. Clearly, what they did not have in mind was the modern American education system. Clearly, what they didn't have in mind was these church pipelines and processes that we have today. And again, I'm not knocking anything as fundamentally unbiblical or wrong. I think there are myriad of tools and resources and things that we can make use of to aid our desire, our practice of making disciples. What we want to get under, what was in Jesus's mind and what was in the minds of the disciples. And the best way for us to do that is to take a look at the first century Jewish context, the context that Jesus and his disciples and all of those that Jesus was reaching, the context that they were a part of. Because if we do not do that, we are bound to bring things to the meaning of the text that is not there. And if our understanding is incorrect, then our application will be wrong. Look, I know that it's a criticism that some people use of Christianity that, we need to just do what Jesus says, be obedient and apply. And so if he said, go and make disciples, go and do it. And where, we want to juxtapose against this other extreme where everybody wants to have Bible studies all day and we want to pontificate and we want to study and we want to read books, but we don't actually want to do anything, right? Matt James talks about that, not just being a hearer, but a doer. I do think it's important, though, to understand that James is not saying we should not hear, right? That we shouldn't be hearers, meaning that I do need to hear. I need to understand what it is that Jesus is asking me to do if I'm to do it well. I'm from Louisiana. And we have unique Cajun dishes here, right? Maybe you've heard of things like gumbo. Maybe you've heard of things like jambalaya. And if I tell someone to go make a gumbo, and what happens is outside of Louisiana, people can confuse, they just kind of group all these Cajun, foods, together. They don't know what gumbo is. If they don't know what jambalaya is, if they don't know what boudin is, right? If they don't know what it is, they can't make it. And if they start kind of going off of, well, I think this is a gumbo, it seems like it's right, or I've heard this over here, and I remember this person over there did this, and this is what they called gumbo, and you're somewhere up north. If you don't know what it is, you can end up making something, and I'm like, well, that's not a gumbo. That's just like a seafood stew, or that's just a soup. And then you're like, but wait, I can't really tell the difference. It seems very similar. If we're going to do well what Jesus is asking us, it does require study and learning and understanding. Now, to Jesus's disciples, they know what he meant. Again, this is just a part of their every way of life, everyday living. So they know what he meant when he said that. So what I want to do as we release from this video, the next video in the series, is I want to take some time and get under what a disciple was in the time of Christ. And once we better understand what a disciple was in the time of Christ, then we can look at, okay, now how do we apply this today? Because look, I'm not trying to argue that what we need to do is we need to, go live like first century Jews in every little way, restructure their culture to our cultural moment, take up all of their practices and their language and all of that stuff. So I think there needs to be translation that's going to happen. But what I certainly don't think we need to continue to do is to infuse the text and to infuse our understanding of what it's saying with our modern concepts and our modern notions. While there is translation that has to happen, and while I do believe there's contextualization that needs to happen, where we begin is not our current moment of life. It's not our modern day era. It's not where we start. Where we start is with an understanding of what did that culture understand at that time? Because as I mentioned earlier, the concept of being a disciple, of making a disciple, that is a Jewish construct. That was something the Jewish people understood. That was a part of the education system that they were a part of. And so they would have understood what Jesus meant when he said. And I believe that when we understand what's under that, there are then going to be principles and practices even that we can start to extract from that information to better align ourselves with what it means to be a disciple of Jesus and what it means to make disciples of Jesus. When we say I'm a disciple of Christ, and we talk about making disciples of Christ, we again have to understand this is not just a blank check term. This isn't just a white label term, meaning that you can fill it with whatever ideas that you want, whatever notions you want. Wrapped up in those terms is going to be implicit meanings, things that are implied with that. And so, as I've mentioned, my contention is we need to get under what that means. So I believe that is the fundamental problem when it comes to being a disciple and making a disciple of Jesus today, is that we have lost, we don't greatly understand what Jesus meant when he said to his audience at that time. However, the solution is the more we can uncover and the more we can recover what Jesus meant when he said, then the better we can go about being and making disciples of Christ. So if you're looking for that next one, and subscribe to the channel, like it. This channel is going to be devoted to not just this topic, but again, this is kind of laying the foundation for everything this channel is going to cover, because spoiler alert, you will see that what it means to be a disciple, what it means to make a disciple of Jesus, it goes far beyond just simply your spiritual life or knowing good theology. It goes beyond just having right knowledge. It goes beyond just spiritual practices and formation and principles. That this idea and what it meant in Jesus's time, it infuses, it fills and forms every single part of your life. And so this channel, this content, we are going to branch into so many topics and so many areas, but the centering idea, the gravity of it all will center around this concept of being a disciple of Jesus. So hope to see you in the next video. Subscribe to stay involved with content like this. Let people know about this if you feel as though this will be helpful for their journey. I know this is the first video that's out, and maybe when you watch it, this will be the only video that is out. And so there's not much more to connect with. However, there will be more stuff coming. And so if you just generally like the ideas that are being shared and kind of the vibe of it, then subscribe and follow, let people know about it. Or who knows, maybe you're watching this 5 years later, there's hundreds of videos. I don't know, but thanks for being a part of the journey. And also, this is very important, because I'll be touching on, I have passion points about a lot of different aspects of the Christian life, from theology to biblical interpretation to apologetics and some of that stuff. So if you are watching, you've made it this far, leave a comment. Let me know, what questions do you have? It doesn't have to just particularly deal with this topic, but anything that's centering around Christianity or cultural moment, faith, and life, because I do believe that being a disciple of Jesus touches all of that. So leave questions in the comments, and I will make videos as well to engage with various topics, whether it deals with apologetics or spiritual stuff, or even stuff regarding physical health or whatever, right? We'll talk about it all and make content about it all, and hopefully have conversations with others as well that can speak to these topics that know way more than me when it comes to this stuff. But this is something that I'm very passionate about, that I do love, this grounding idea of being a disciple of Jesus, making disciples of Jesus. See you in the next video.